6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witness for being here. I appreciated your opening testimony. I did find it quite interesting, actually. I've had been on China Committee before, and certainly it was an issue we studied at Immigration Committee when I was on that panel in reference to Taiwan. We also have studied at Public Safety Committee the Canada's security posture in response to Russian aggression, and China came into that discussion as well. So I was a bit surprised actually at some of your opening remarks. It seemed like, perhaps downplaying is not the word, but it seemed like you were saying that perhaps some folks on the international communications are overplaying the dangers that China has, that they aren't really as coordinated as some of us feel. Can you just clarify or further comment? I may be misinterpreting what you were saying.
Yes, so thank you for the opportunity to clarify. So I do think that there is, when assessing behavior and trying to unpack behavior and interpret the implications of that behavior from a particular state, there is a risk of threat inflation that we need to take into account. There is a risk in terms of assuming that speculation about what is going on is actually evidence that this particular behavior that we expect is going on. And I think that there is a tendency that we should be mindful of in thinking that the analogy between what Russia is doing in the international stage means that China will necessarily embark on similar courses of action. And I do think that it is important to consider the fact that China's relationship with the existing international order is much more ambiguous, and it is much less clear that China is aiming to act as much as a spoiler and a destabilizing force when it comes to the international order than Russia is at the moment. So it's about being wary about drawing analogies.
And what do you feel China's goals are in the international stage?
I'm not convinced that China seeks to overthrow the existing international order or to replace the United States as the main driver behind the existing rules. I think what is important to do when it comes to assessing China's behavior is to compartmentalize the discussion a little bit and focus on breaking down certain domains of international order, and then trying to assess whether China's behavior is merely pushing for a particular interpretation of the rules that doesn't align with our interests or preferences, or alternatively as seeking to overthrow the rules. I think there is a nuance, there is a difference, and here China's behavior, insofar as I can tell, is not it is not as clear that China is pushing for alternate conceptions of the rules than the way that Russia is actually doing it.
Thank you very much. And it's my understanding that in the last 30 years, 40 years, we've really provided a lot of our manufacturing jobs over to China, that the Western world has really led its foreign policy concerning China, that the more we build trade and relationships, the more China will become like us. I'm sure you've heard this, and that's certainly has not been the case. And we have a lot of vulnerabilities with China, as we saw during the Meng Wanzhou situation with the canola ban and pork and many others. So we are very vulnerable in some ways with our trade, although of course there are things. Of course, China needs to feed over 1 billion people, so they do need food, and Canada's a large supplier of that, but we certainly saw them take advantage of that. So I'm just concerned that it seems very much that their intentions are not, they're not necessarily for our interests, and certainly serving their own. You may have heard recently our Chief of the Defense Staff, General Eyre, has said that his position is that China wants to remake the world to suit their needs. It's very much the position of our military, obviously. So can you comment on that? Are they seeing this wrong in your opinion, or do our defense capabilities need to step up to meet this challenge that he sees?
So I think you're absolutely right to point out that our expectations of China becoming more like us have not materialized, and I think we need to adjust to that reality. Absolutely. What I don't think though is that from that we can derive the conclusion that China um, will behave in particular areas all the time in ways that conflict directly with our interests and preferences. So I think it's important to be able to identify the areas where indeed a difference of interests, values, and preferences can actually needs to be, reacted to or addressed, in areas where actually or interests and preferences might align in ways that we don't necessarily suspect. And I think it's important to remember that the fact that China that our expectations of China becoming, transitioning into as a liberal democracy through its embeddedness in the global economy have not materialized doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to engage China and be able to find ways to convince them to engage in forms of behavior that align more closely with the way that we see the rules underpinning the international order to in ways that can sustain our interest and preferences in this regard. I don't think it's a mutually exclusive thing, but I do think that we need to move past these expectations that we're going to be able to see a transformation of China in a way that where China becomes one of the like-minded on virtually all domains. So
Thank you,
getting
Dr.
rid of these
Martel.
expectations and reacting to that is
Yeah,
important.
Ms. Dancho is out of time, but Mr. Cormier